What actually did inspire me in this, seriously, to do this, is some thoughts from an author that I cannot say I'm deeply read in, but a man whose most famous book I've read with some relish, and some of whose articles I've also read, again, relishing, savoring, as Robert would prefer to say, the intelligence and the judiciousness of the man's insights. He's not a Catholic, although he was so lettered, not only on Western culture and its classic heritage, but on Christian tradition, that he fooled even the great Frederick Wilhelmsen, as being a Catholic. Wilhelmsen thought that Richard Weaver was a Catholic after having some conversation with him. The man is Richard Weaver. He was a disciple of some of the Southern agrarians. Therefore, he is sort of a personal interest to me, being a Southern patriot. But I think the man's interest should transcend mere Southernism, and as he taught at the University of Chicago, he was quite at home above the Mason-Dixon line as well. The man wrote an excellent book right after World War II to attempt to explain what it is that led to the barbarism of World War II. And for those in my generation who never really gave much thought to how barbaric the last good war was, it was a bit of a shocker for me. My first introduction to that subject, of course, was reading the Loyals and Cabots, reading about Catholics who made a very, very serious objection to the nuclear bombings of what ended up being the two most Catholic centers in Japan, Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The book is called Ideas Have Consequences. And in a passage in the book where he dwells on Plato, the man was a Platonist. And I think I would disagree with him on this point. He thought that one of the problems in the Catholic Church was when she went to Aristotelian with St. Thomas Aquinas. But our good friend Charles Cologne, I'm sure, would be very much in agreement. But while we would disagree with him on that, it's not a matter of dogma, that is for sure. Weaver quoted Plato in the book. Believe it or not, Plato did not like books. Even though there are books that are credited to his dialogues and so forth, he himself was not pro-book. He thought that wisdom was best passed on, as we would say, has been said in this conference, organically, and he thought that it was something which flamed up in conversation. Therefore, the Platonic dialogue. Now, I don't know that what we will accomplish this evening is going to be a Platonic dialogue, a free-for-all, a confused hodgepodge, or a cacophony. But I would hope that we would approximate something of an intelligent discourse. And I am going to be your not humble enough moderator, but I'll attempt to show some humility in this role. What my plan is to make this flame up in the conversation is to sort of throw out to the table of our speakers, of which I am not one. I really get to judge the truth of all of it. In all humility. Could I have some water, please? Can somebody give me some water and a cup of coffee? Thank you. Well, is anything? I'll show you guys something better. So, this is going to be loops. Now, if there's a total breakdown at the table, I think what we'll do is turn it into a question and answer session. Or we might just agree that it's best to turn it into a question and answer session so that we might hear what the audience would like to know and kick it around to our speakers. So, the first question that I have, and I'd like all of our speakers to address the question, and nobody has to address this question completely, since they've not been cued in on this at all, except Gary Potter, who I bounced ideas off of. But nobody's really been cued off as to what I'm doing. The first question is, since this is in keeping with the theme of the conference. What are the essential elements of Catholic culture? And again, I want to emphasize, no one speaker has to attempt an exhaustive list. You could rattle off 1 or 3 or 5 or whatever. You might just want to focus in on one and highlight its importance. Would anybody like to start the discussion by saying one thing that is an essential, I don't mean an incidental, but an essential of Catholic culture? Mr. Doyle, I do ask this of the speakers, that you do ask for recognition. That's all. Thank you, John.
Eamon de Valera, the greatest Catholic statesman of the 20th century, wrote in the Irish Constitution that the family has inalienable and imprescriptible rights that are antecedent and superior to the state. Family is antecedent and superior to the state. That's the essential element.
I would note for my own contribution that Antonio Salazar did something similar in Portugal, seeking to secure the rights of the family first as foundational to a Catholic state.
Well, I'm not sure that's unique to a Catholic state. That's the family ought to be foundational to every society, every state.
If you could just, not everybody has the gift of loudness like I do, but if you could try to do it a little more. Gary said that that's not something that is peculiar to the Catholic state. Any state that is worthy of the name.
But we're talking about states right now as what's essential to a Catholic culture.
Well, we're speaking about culture, but I'm sorry, I introduced the word state. Pardon.
Even if it's not unique, it's still essential.
It's still essential. And in the recently completed African Synod in Rome, which, by the way, produced an impressive document at the end, one which took some serious jabs at the United Nations and foreigners who meddle in Africa's affairs, it was noted that they are undoing Africa's traditions. And this was deliberate language to shame the Western nations who were going there and imposing birth control and abortion and other such things. Would anybody else like to contribute?
I'd like to add to the note on the family. The popes have written numerous encyclicals on this point. I used some of the quotes in the handout that I put together, and I don't have the memory of Mr. Doyle, but there's certainly popes all throughout, especially the more recent ones from Leo XIII on, have written a lot about the family.
That's where we got it from.
And of course, some of the other great Catholic statesmen of the same era who were fighting the same evils were doing the same. And as Doug Versaw pointed out to me once in a conversation, these were things that popes didn't have to write about until the Industrial Revolution began the breakdown of the family. And men were working in factories all day and half the night and so forth, and were taken out of the home, causing the breakdown of the family. Robert.
I would like to make a comment and then ask a question to my more learned colleagues about this in law. But some friends of mine that are devout Catholics and lawyers told me it was very important at one time, including this country, the family as a unit had a status in public law. I don't know when that became disassembled, with various things. I think that that's very important, the family. Number two, a friend of mine who's not known publicly as a traditionalist, but was a student of Dr. Pieper's, John Haas, the head of the Catholic Bioethics Center, and very knowledgeable, without saying openly, about a lot of things in Boston and cardinal law that we knew. He one time told me, after I read Familiaris Consortio, that John Paul II no longer considered the man as the head of the family. There was a kind of diarchy. And John reread it and said, "You're right. I was wrong." Now this is the kind of confusion that comes about the family and the head of the family. I just mentioned that the family is status in public law, and now the teaching, if the law of non-contradiction applies, the family, is it a diarchy and a dialogue, or is there a hierarchy in the family as we're supposed to be in the papal monarchy? But and maybe someone like Jack or Gary especially, or